A confusing brand, lose a grand, and a final stand. It's October 1989, and this is Yesterzine. Controversy time, folks. Twice now this show has looked at issues of Sega Master Force, the greatest magazine of all time by default, as it's the only magazine that focused exclusively on history's greatest console, the Sega Master System. But was it? Because when that magazine was most recently mentioned as we covered its Mega Drive sister, several commenters wanted a word on that one. Hadouken and Daff being two who pointed out this, S the Sega Magazine from 1989. And they're not entirely wrong, of course. We're going to look at the first issue of said magazine this month, and indeed the Master System is the only machine mentioned. I kinda don't count it though, because that's only because the Master System was the only machine that existed in the UK at the time. 12 issues of S were published, and by the end explicitly covered the just launched Mega Drive. It appears in the news section as early as issue 2, so despite the masthead on that issue that claimed 100% dedicated to Britain's best-selling console, take note NES supremacist YouTubers, S was never a Master System magazine for me. If you want an illustration of that, said masthead survives till issue 10, where it's writing a check that bounces as soon as you look at literally any of the rest of the cover. That said, it's an interesting one because it was always a curio. It's only 32 pages, but by design, not because the format is dying. It's a cheap console mag for the cheap console at only £1, and it packs in the content. The experiment didn't fail either. The only reason there's just the 12 issues of S is because as of issue 13, it was renamed to Sega Power, a considerably more famous name to be sure. Even then, it had only 52 pages at first, a number that gradually rose over the next year to a more standard 84. Which makes this first issue of S from October 1989 more interesting than it might perhaps appear, spawning a legacy that had taken 3 distinct names over the next near decade. We've got a Sega Classic somehow already on its 3rd iteration on the machine, although the first not a conversion. We've got a somewhat dodgy game concept for a machine still pitched at kids, a scandalous look at a naked Master System, and we'll look at playing light gun games without hardware in 2026. First though, the news. It's a common refrain that consoles were nowhere in the tail end of the 80s and computers ruled. It's not without merit. The consoles didn't become ever present until the Mega Drive and SNES. But one of the reasons this show's conceit is useful is that people's memories are faulty. The internet can be changed. History's perception can be mistaken. We saw that last month. Ironically, what can't be edited is magazines. They can sometimes be the true immutable record of what the situation really was. And the situation in July 1989 is that there was a Master System game at number 2 in the full price software charts, outselling, in terms of number of units, all but one other game in the whole UK, and unsurprisingly, given the price of console games, being number 1 if the chart is ordered by money. This had already made it the best-selling Master System game in the UK so far. That's surprise enough, but you're probably not going to guess which game it is. I didn't. The conversion is by Sega, although they didn't bother publishing it in the US for some reason. But it's not one of their biggies. It's not any of the 3 Fantasies Zone. It's not Hang On. It's not even Phantasy Star. It's not any of Sega's other arcade games like Outrun, Afterburner, Shinobi or Space Harrier, all of which are on the machine. But it is an arcade conversion. Rampage, Midway's classic coin-op. I'd have not guessed that one with a copy of Rise of the Robots to my head. Not to say it's a bad conversion. It is notably and undeniably better than a NES effort that doesn't even have all the monsters, for instance, and it carries a healthy Sega Retro review average of 76. This includes a retrospective review in the aforementioned issue 10 of this magazine, where it gets 84% despite having apparently gone up in price a fiver. Speaking of expensive, the Master System had always had a weapon here over the NES. As well as carts, it could use a little credit card sized game format too. The Sega My Card were notably cheaper to make, although had the disadvantage of being restricted to 32 kilobytes. This meant that games like Hang On, Teddy Boy and Transbot could be sold for £15, a price some 8-bit computer software would occasionally approach, and notably half the price of either Sega or Nintendo cartridge games. It was a useful device in the early days of the system, but their appearance in this magazine is to announce their demise. All but one game, Great Soccer, would get a re-release on cart, and thanks to lowered costs, those re-releases would cost the same as cards anyway. When Sega released the updated Slimline Master System 2, one of their cost savings was to remove the card slot entirely. Ironically, their short life and duplicate nature means that the card copies of games are these days sold for considerably more than their cart-based cousins, with the exclusive Great Soccer, a confusingly distinct game from the game sold as Great Soccer in some markets on a cart, commanding 3 figures. Which is a shame, because everyone should own at least one just for their killer box art of take a picture of the card, which in all cases involves the cart's box art, and then just putting that picture on the box. The limitations of the card are illustrated by the Coming Soon games. One of the Master System's iconic but divisive platformers appears next month. Psycho Fox is a 2 mega cartridge, which in English means 8 times the capacity of one of those cards. Also imminent is a shoot-'em-up I will only ever now be able to think of as Cloudmaster. Cloudmaster, as Sega would presumably prefer you to call it, is the same size, and so is Tennis Ace. S is not an official Sega magazine, they make this clear on the contents page, but nonetheless they're the host of the official UK Sega Club. Sega didn't do their own distribution at this point, preferring Virgin-owned Mastertronic. It is they who run the club, which comes with a presumably year-long subscription to the totally independent magazine we're reading, which costs the same as 20 issues but includes 2 free issues. I don't quite know how they figure that, especially as you can get a 14-issue subscription for £15, still more than the cover price, a few pages later. I also have absolutely no idea what they mean by a total backup service either, but a copy of Power Strike for half price is compelling. Known as a Lest in its native language, it's only prevented from being the best shooter on the platform by its own sequel. Devolving all this to Mastertronic wasn't Sega's idea as such. Mastertronic's co-founder Frank Herman had approached them, and the partnership was successful enough thanks to Mastertronic's UK contacts and experience, it expanded to more places in Europe. As the computer market declined, Sega became nearly the whole business, and Sega purchased Mastertronic as a whole in 1991. To get to this part of the issue though, we've already skipped past a review of a Sega classic, that's also a not Sega classic. This is Wonderboy, a lovely arcade platformer by Westone, at the time known as Escape. From the same year as Outrun, it visibly uses much simpler hardware than that powerhouse, being mostly Z80 based with a Texas Instruments programmable sound generator. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because that's also a perfectly valid description of a Master System. And so, there was an inevitable port in 1987, called Super Wonderboy in Japan because of a previous version on the older SG-1000. It's a near-perfect attempt, with only minor downgrades technically, and even featuring a couple of new areas. It was an early highlight for the machine. It was followed by 5 sequels, starting with 2 in the arcade, Wonderboy in Monsterland and Wonderboy 3 Monster Lair. And then we get to our game, the first JBU console one and the 4th game overall, which is called Wonderboy 3. Subtitled The Dragon's Trap, it would be followed by one more Master System game, Wonderboy in Monster World, not to be confused with Monster Land, and finally a Mega Drive game, the 6th in the series, which was called Monster World 4.
I feel I'm going to need a corkboard and string for this one.
It doesn't get easier. The key is that wasn't the only port. Sega have always owned the Wonderboy name, but Westone have always owned the games. This means Wonderboy has a NES version, although fans would be forgiven for not noticing. Hudson Soft produced it under the name Adventure Island. Conversely, now Hudson owned a name without a game, so made their own sequels, starting with Adventure Island 2, or, as it was known on Game Boy, Adventure Island. These remained arcade games in a world where, as you'll soon see, Sega's evolved. They did keep the name confusion though, with Adventure Island 2 followed, in order, by Super Adventure Island, New Adventure Island, and the fifth game, Adventure Island 3. Then by Adventure Island 4, Super Adventure Island 2, and somehow Adventure Island The Beginning. It gets worse because our featured game, the second Wonderboy 3, got a PC Engine conversion where it was known as Adventure Island. Americans thinking this looks familiar, this is what you knew on TG16 as Dragon's Curse for reasons that will become apparent. And Brazilians thinking this looks familiar, yes, this is Terma Demonica Emo Resurgate. And I can't face explaining that cover to anyone who isn't.
I'm going for a lie down.
Dragon's Trap starts with a bait and switch. As the full power red hot upgraded Mega Wonderboy from the end of Monsterland, you go storming through a quick castle level looking for the dragon, waving around your Mega Sword and with more hearts than the clearance bin at Clinton Cards on the 15th of February. It's already not an arcade machine. There's no timer here, there's no hurry up at all, and this is your first introduction to the game taking advantage of this by being clever with its level design, because we're in an admittedly very simple maze. If you don't follow the exact route I am here, then you will simply find yourself back at the start until you do. Which might be preferable because what's next is a game-ending boss. This dragon is supposed to be a simple joke of a boss with your current abilities, but he can only be damaged by smacking him on the head, and in this, only my second attempt at the game, I come perilously close to losing to him.
This does not bode well for me completing this game.
Alas, this does not end the game, probably for the best if you spent 28 quid on it. With its final act, the dragon manages to curse you and you turn into a lizard man who has only the one heart, half as many as Phil Collins. On the plus side, you also have fire breath, which makes escaping the rapidly collapsing castle a breeze. From there, rather than go into business as the world's most efficient kebab bossman, Wonderboy decides to try and rid himself of the curse, which he apparently just knows can be achieved by defeating the vampire dragon to obtain the Salamander Cross. At this point, my references to this being an RPG come into play. It's semi-linear, but your basic task is to find and defeat the other dungeons, to get some more forms you can change into, all of which will be needed to reach and defeat the end boss.
And again, apparently he just knows this.
To illustrate the basic loot though, let's go after the most sensible first target, the mummy dragon.
I know what you're expecting here, but that's way too easy. Don't worry, it's coming.
We kill the enemies in order to receive coins. Coins will be spent in various shops for better equipment, enabling us to kill more and better enemies. And that's the only way we'll be able to do so, as this game has no concept of levelling up beyond the acquisition of the different forms, all of which are different but not always better. Although some items are not purchasable while certain characters. Luckily, the game does something right, so many games don't. You're not really punished for dying. You'll be returned to the starting village, sure, but you keep your gold and quest items. If not, the magical secondary weapons you can sometimes pick up. These don't seem to be saved as part of the password either though, so nothing really lost. First though, we need to open up the route to the desert, and I know from previous failure that key is located at the far right on the beach section. It's a game that rewards some exploration though, as my initial failure to have made all the jumps to get there leaves me in the water. Making my way through that, trying to find the way out, gives me treasure rooms and lots more interesting enemies to farm. Enemies are not super numerous and have reasonably predictable patterns, with the main problem being the multiple hits some take. The game is easing me in here though, the lizard is the only one with a ranged weapon as standard. It's a tedious term to use, but this game employs a form of Metroidvania to the way it goes about things. Some of these areas will be accessible only when I have access to the other forms, presumably containing my routes into some of the other areas with additional shops to buy the better weaponry from. It does feel like a game that wants you to succeed, which is sometimes rare for a retro game. It's about the exploration and discovery without being so utterly expansive as, say, a Phantasy Star. Although, it can want what it likes. As far as I got before I really needed to start writing this up, I haven't actually seen the first boss yet, and I strongly suspect said boss is going to kick my ass multiple times when I do. If I reach the boss, I'll cut in footage now to illustrate that. Thing is, I get a little further every time I go back, which is how I no doubt eventually reached and beat that boss. I learn how this game works, and frankly I'm not normally a person that puts in that kind of effort, which is why I'm so awful at games in general. Part of that is the level design. I got annoyed at one route but realised I could fall through the floor and attempt it underwater, only viable for some of your possible forms. Either way you go, there are bonuses to discover, including new permanent health hearts. You'll also find different enemy types with attack patterns and behaviours you may find easier to handle. Although it does love to do the same enemy, but now they take more hits a little too often for my liking. As much as anything, of course, that's still a memory restriction. For an SMS game, Wonderboy 3 is a chunky thing. It's the same 2 megabit as Tennis Ace, Cloudmaster and Psycho Fox are. But that's still 256 kilobytes, about a third of an Amiga disk. With enough semi-open multiple path overworld to handle the tracking down of 5 forms, all the equipment and the bosses themselves, something does have to give to an extent. Afterburner, for instance, is twice this size. Excitingly, so is the sequel to this. It takes a lot for a Mazzy-Sazzy game to surprise me at this point, and somehow I've overlooked Wonderboy's soft RPG era, having not quite got on with the arcade ones. That was a mistake, and one you shouldn't repeat. Genres of games go in and out of fashion, sometimes for taste reasons, sometimes for tech reasons. Because here's the thing, while technology marching on generally opens up possibilities, that's not always true. Light gun games, huge from the mid-80s when they started becoming sensibly possible, right up until the mid-late 90s when Time Crisis and Virtua Cop were still system sellers for the PlayStation and Saturn. And then they pretty much disappeared. It's a longer discussion, but I see 2 principal reasons. The first is the gradual death of the arcade, where most of these games came from by that point. It took a lot to sell an original light gun game by the 32-bit era, when the same money would buy you something like a Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid or Final Fantasy VII, which would last you several months.
And that's just watching the intro cutscene.
But also, traditional light guns work via several methods, which all have one thing in common. They involve knowing where the TV's light beam is redrawing the image. It's really clever, it works perfectly, it's infallible, and it only works on a CRT. All various forms of non-tube screens do not work that way, and thus neither do normal light guns. And what sad bastard still has a CRT and a light gun in 2026?
You'd have to be crazy.
The interim solutions were not great. You do not want to have to try and play a light gun game with a digital joypad, as we once discovered with 3DO Mad Dog McRae. But also, with T2 the arcade game on this very system, which does not support a light gun, despite the system already having one. But that does leave plenty of good games utterly abandoned, and I know of 3 solutions for decently playing games like Wanted, reviewed this month. I'm going to gloss over 2 of them though, because they require expensive extra hardware. There's EmuVR, whose premise is simple: play video games in VR, giving you a playground of TVs and consoles to cable together and play. VR controllers are perfectly made for this, and of course know exactly where you're pointing them, and so does the game. The problem is, it also requires a computer with a decent hustle and a VR headset of as good a resolution as possible. It's not accessible. And neither really are the new breed of light gun that can handle an LCD. The most notable implementation of the premise is the Sinden light gun, but one of those will cost you £90 plus shipping for the basic model. If you somehow already have a CRT, a Master System, light gun and the game can be had for less than that. But I'm guessing what you do have is something with a mouse. Many emulators will let you use it. One of those is the last version of Kega Fusion, where you just need to tell it a light phaser is in port 1 and enable mouse emulation. It's probably the best modern way to play. Once you get that working, Wanted will give you a decent game. It's not got any originality, of course. There are dudes to shoot. There are dudettes to not shoot. There are dudes to not shoot who look for all the world like the dudes to shoot. And there are sometimes dudes to shoot who pretend to be the dudes to not shoot. Wanted is a very simple game. At £20, Wanted is also the cheapest of the 3 games we've reviewed in this issue, but at 2/3 the price of Wonderboy still feels like a lot. That said, the stages have variety. I've only got to the second, not least because even with this emulator setup there's a slight offset on the aiming, but I've already had the standard dudes in Windows level and now a horse chase. There's 6 stages plus a boss stage, albeit using the street and horse conceits again. Even so, should you be any good at this, a complete playthrough clocks in at well under 15 minutes. S gave it 79%, which feels somewhat generous. But this is where the emulation option helps, of course. You moneybags people can use a Sinden, but for the price of about 30 seconds setting up, the rest of us can easily play these and the many other SMS light gun games. There's worse ways to spend an hour. Another way in which magazines are a good record is sales figures. The SMS is approaching 2 years old in the UK, and S reports there were 100,000 units floating around. An impressive figure, but it's an illustration of how much smaller the market was in general. The Switch 2 sold twice that in week 1. And while admittedly that was Nintendo's best ever UK launch, it's less than either the PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series, which were of course fairly seriously stock constrained for reasons we all remember. Another indication we're early is they still feel it valuable to explain what a sprite is, and that they're overlaid on the background so they don't interfere with the graphics beneath. Which sounds obvious, but is of course not entirely true on, say, the ZX Spectrum, which shares a CPU with our host. They make what I believe to be a mistake here, saying the SMS can handle 256 sprites, but only 4 on a line. I believe that limitation is actually 8. As they point out, if you try to force more, then the result is the trademark flickering you get when the machine is being pushed hard. Having ribbed the Spectrum's attribute clash caused effectively by it treating things as squares, then we have to reveal the SMS's version of that. The 8x8 character blocks have solid edges. The machine points out Space Harrier is a good way to see this, but a really good way to see this is the 3D version of Space Harrier, as chunks of background surrounding the enemies very visibly fly at your face. The absolute best feature of a Master System at the time is almost glossed over. The NES only has a standard grade RF socket and a composite phono video output, which to use a technical term looks shit. The SMS has a proprietary socket it shares with the Mega Drive 1 and can output lovely analog RGB for SCART equipped TVs. Nintendo didn't fully have this in the UK until GameCube. Unfortunately, along with the card slot, it's the other thing that got dropped from the SMS2. They also point out the expansion port on the bottom, which they speculate could have been for modems or CD-ROMs, quite the suggestion in 1989. They lament it remains unused. 37 years later, it still does. The other thing that seems semi-remarkable to me is the number of manufacturers that are involved. Other than perhaps Sony, none of the historical games machine makers were also chip makers. In fact, the SMS uses a Sony chip as part of its screen output, and also the nearest thing to an operating system the machine has. The CPU is made by Zilog, the RAM by NEC, and the sound chip, badge Sega here, is actually from Texas Instruments. The graphics hardware, designed by Sega, was also made by Texas and was based on the Texas chip used in the SG-1000. The article also includes a pretty decent explanation of a light gun which I probably should have used instead of my ham-fisted effort. But it also covers the 3D glasses that were used for games like Space Harrier 3D. I once described this as VR before VR, and you can see it these days using emulators like Decca set to anaglyph mode. If you have 3D glasses, put them on now. But the actual 3D glasses are much cleverer. True 3D requires 2 separate views, one for each eye, and the SMS achieves this by drawing them in turns and using bespoke glasses that close shutters on each side alternately. This shows each eye the requisite view and provides for an incredibly convincing 3D view in the days before VR. If I pop the unprocessed version in the corner to try and avoid a seizure warning, you can see how it'll work. There are disadvantages. You'll have probably worked out the main one of them is to halve the frame rate, something an 8-bit machine doesn't have a surplus of at the best of times. But it also means the glasses need to sync with the console. The SMS does this by plugging said glasses into the card slot, meaning we've just discovered they won't work on an SMS2. This is somewhat academic these days though, because the effect, much like the light gun, requires a CRT, which means the one 3D light gun game, Missile Defense 3D, can only properly be played if you have a CRT, light gun, the game, and 3D glasses, and what idiot would have all that in 2026? As I say, you can get an idea by using the emulator Decca, albeit at a severe loss of colour depth, but it does kinda amaze me that no one has ever bothered to get this working on any of the popular VR headsets. A search for that mostly returns a 4-year-old video about Decca. It's a great video to be fair, and I should know, because I made it. It's not exclusive to here, but in a world where violence or sex of any kind will get your game slapped with an adult-only Peggy sticker before you can say lollipop chainsaw, It always astonishes me that the same has never really applied to gambling. And I'm not talking loot boxes, which are a whole crate of DLC worms on their own. I'm talking about games whose whole express purpose is essentially gambling. The one most of our generation encountered first was Codemaster's Advanced Fruit Machine Simulator, an entirely pointless button pusher of a thing that appeared to exist only to teach kids that gambling was a cool use of their time. But people didn't push back on what was, essentially, a 100% accurate simulation of losing 3 months' wages in a dingy high street shop. They pushed back on the hilariously obviously comedic violence of Mortal Kombat. Nintendo claimed, ultimately erroneously, that the camp idiocy of Night Trap was so objectionable it would never be on a Nintendo system, while being perfectly happy to allow Super Caesar's Palace the same year, a game so nakedly pro-gambling it even includes scratch cards to really indoctrinate those kids. These scratch cards work exactly like real ones, whereas surprisingly rarely do I have the real-life opportunity to drop ninjas through trapdoors. Caesar's Palace is on Mega Drive and Game Gear too, but it wasn't the first time Sega allowed such a thing. Reviewed in this issue is Casino Games by Aleste and Puyo Puyo developers Compile. And Casino Games is nakedly thus. One of its 5 games is literally just a fruit machine. It's not even a clever one like some of the modern ones. It has 3 lines and you can bet up to 3 coins on each line for each spin. But that's the entire thing. Other than that, it's as basic as they come without even a hold button, and certainly not side mini-games or anything that lasts longer than the time it takes to push a single button to spin the reels again. Forget any concept of the morals of this. It's a really dull game. You throw in some coins using a button, you pull a lever with the other button. Number go up, or in most cases down. Repeat until bored, which is a total of about 3 times. There is absolutely no skill here, and the only way you can even affect the game is by choosing how many coins to put in, which adds bets to the 3 reels in a set predetermined order. Which at least makes it better than the card game of Baccarat, at least in the variety played here. You get dealt 2 cards and you add up their value. The unit value of that answer is your score, e.g. a 6 and a 7 is 13, so your score is 3. If your score is less than 5, you automatically get an extra card.
And that's it.
There is no interaction other than choosing the amount you bet, but since this is a decision you make with absolutely no visibility of the game or any means of affecting the outcome, essentially this entire game is sometimes pushing a button. Making this would be a vaguely interesting first programming project, but there's no reason to play it for more than 2 hands. It's not even a good game if you're betting real money compared to literally anything else you can use a set of cards for. Which is lucky, because 2 of our remaining games are card games. They are at least the classics. Blackjack, which here is implemented perfectly competently. It's an easy game to play, and at least now you have some agency. The short version of Blackjack is you start with 2 cards, and you can keep requesting more to get you as close to 21 as possible without going over. You are playing against the dealer, who will always give up at 17. It's not a deep game, it's still gambling, but there is at least theoretically some interaction there, and it's a very decent recreation of it. It's a good time though to bring up the critical and obvious flaw in this entire package.
There's no 2-player.
Obviously it wouldn't really work for the fruit machine, but it's a very strange omission for the cards games. You still wouldn't be playing against the other player on individual hands in either of the games we've seen so far, but at least there would be some measure of competition or reason to play the thing for more than 10 minutes at all. If what you're looking for is an 8-bit recreation of a simple card game that you can play against no one, then yeah, go ahead, there's nothing to fault here. Or recommend. Worse things to play on your phone while waiting for a bus, I guess, but if you've got an SMS game on your phone, I wave frantically in the direction of Shanghai. The remaining card game is the one you've all guessed it is, poker. But it might not be the poker you think it is. Poker in the UK pretty much owes its popularity to the Channel 4 show Late Night Poker. But the style of poker made famous on that show is Texas Hold'em, a form where every player gets 2 cards and makes a 5-card hand using some of a shared pool of cards dealt face up on the table and revealed in stages. The poker in this game is the much more traditional version where you simply get 5 cards with a single chance to swap them, which is an adjustment for anyone who was at university between 1999 and 2011 who probably spent several tipsy nights in front of the show. Although that does mean the recent spate of internet videos being surprised Victoria Coren Mitchell plays poker were of no substance to us. Victoria, incidentally, has lifetime winnings of somewhere around £2 million and has been a member of the Hall of Fame for a decade. This plays a perfectly good game of poker, but again, and especially here, you wish for a two-player mode. Poker is inherently a game of reading another human opponent, and playing against a dealer gets boring incredibly quickly. The game does attempt a measure of this by letting you choose your opponent, a hidden difficulty level select between Nancy, Janet, Dick and Charlie. To the immense disappointment of your mum, Dick is not the hardest. Which is really the problem with this entire run of 4 gambling-based games. Without the real money and the real humans, it just doesn't work as an entertainment medium for more than a few minutes, and this was a game which cost only £3 less than Wonderboy, and £5 more than Wanted. It does at least use a password to keep your progress between sessions, with the nominal goal of winning $1 million, but there's not a full game here. S tended to agree, pointing out correctly that it looks lovely, and it does with some lovely animation, but also suggesting only poker requires any real thought or strategy. There's also another issue. Numbers fans amongst you will have noticed I said there are 5 games total within this pack, so there's one we haven't seen. So which super popular casino-based money game do you think is the remaining one? That's right. Pinball. Wait, what? S was similarly confused when roulette was right there as an obvious inclusion. The pinball table is also pointless within the confines of the game as there is no mechanism for winning or losing money in it. For an 8-bit pinball, it's okay, I guess, if a little basic, but it's probably not ideal that the best thing in the game and the part you will spend the most time playing is the bit that has absolutely no bearing on the actual game.
In many ways, it's a low-rent version of what Sega would do a decade later with Shenmue, where we all just spent our time playing Hang-On.
So what we're left with as a pack is a bunch of basic gambling games that, even ignoring my problems with it, including Sega literally branding it as family, is just not worth your time or money. Even when allied to a basic out-of-place pinball game that in 2026 is inferior both to Eroiz's recent Crazy Pinball or the homebrew ported version of the classic Pinball Dreams, if you absolutely must play pinball on an SMS. S gave it 57%, and that's generous. If you really want a package like this, consider Compile's other attempt, Parlour Games, which was written first, but released, in Europe at least, afterwards. It at least has billiards and darts alongside its gambling entry of bingo.
Not least because, despite being the earlier game, Parlour supports 2-player.
Which really sums it up. Casino games is kinda nothing. It's difficult to pick too many objective faults with it. It's a competent simulation of a bunch of stuff it's absolutely pointless to simulate, done in the most that'll do way imaginable. You half expect to see a Tiertex logo. If you want to play poker, pinball or Cthulhu help you a fruit machine, then there's much, much better ways. On the back page, as is traditional for the month of Marchster System, SMS Power are running their coding, music and hack competitions again. They close the day this episode goes live, so head to smspower.org and get downloading. Or wait a couple of weeks for my so-called definitive guide to the coding entrance. Previous high-quality releases from this have included Flight of the Pigorus, Stiggy Inquest, and that pinball game you saw 2 minutes ago. Will we get an equal this year? Every chance. And once you've finished all of those, it might just be time for next month's episode, which I will not be around to promote thanks to being on a boat somewhere under Spain. So if you could all flood social media with the link, that'd be great. Cheers, loves.